What's up, everybody? I'm not Jenny, I'm Kyle. Jenny ain't here, she on vacation. And these are my comrades, my bros. Got Paul and Steve here. How you guys doing?
We're doing great. What's wrong with your voice?
I don't know. Let me snap. Frog in my throat. All right. Ready for some questions?
Yes. I think we're ready.
All right, let's do it. This one's from Jason E. It's kind of a long one, so bear with me. I have a GTX 660 superclocked 3 gigs of RAM. I'm wanting to upgrade my graphics potential, but I'm not sure if I should buy a 760 and run them in SLI or go with a higher one-card setup. I know that if you put 2 different RAM sticks with different speeds in your motherboard, the RAM is clocked at the lowest RAM speed for all sticks. Is this the same for graphics cards? And if so, would I lose some performance in my 760? Power consumption isn't a worry for me, but I'd rather continue to use my 660 because it works fine. But newer games are requiring me to bump my ultra settings down because it's a slightly older card. Thanks for your help. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Jason. That was a very long question, but a very good one.
Thank you very much, Jason. To answer your question, I'm going to answer the second part of it first, which is much like memory when you have 2 cards installed in SLI. Yes, they'll run at whatever the lowest frequency is of the 2 cards if they run at different frequencies out of the box. Your question about SLIing a GTX 660 and a 760 is a no answer on that one. Those will not work. AMD actually has a little bit more flexibility with Crossfire, so you can pair cards that are different models or different SKUs for the GPU as long as they're within the same family. Anyway, NVIDIA is a little bit more restrictive. You have to use the exact same GPU and it needs to also have the exact same frame buffer size, so it needs to be a 2 gig card, 2 gig 760 and another 2 gig 760, for example. So in your situation, if you can find a GTX 660 that's like reasonably priced, maybe a used one or something like that, that might be actually be a reasonable solution because it would probably be the least expensive and it would boost up your performance. Other than that, I generally recommend going with a more expensive or a bigger single card than trying for an SLI configuration, just because there's potential issues you can run into with compatibility and that sort of thing.
To add to that, though, if you do end up going with a newer card, you could still use the 660 as a PhysX accelerator.
That's
just
true.
Like chilling in your system. Obviously, you don't want to put that in the primary. You're going to want the fastest one to be in the primary PCI Express slot. But other than that, I think that's another solution. More used for that 660 card, I guess.
Yep. Just to add to that, what you were saying about compatibility in SLI, that's also a good factor to consider. Because generally when you SLI 2 cards, sometimes you'll get better performance than with a single better card, a single higher tier card, but sometimes you'll get worse performance. And that's just because games are optimized for different things. Some developers optimize their games for multi-card configurations, whereas others really just focus on the one single card. But I don't know, I prefer a single card as well because it's a bit more consistent, whereas sometimes you kind of roll the dice with SLI, maybe you get those extra frames, but sometimes you don't get quite nearly the performance you paid for or thought you would. So just something to consider. It's all about preference too. But good question, thank you Jason. This one's from Theory Gamer. Hey guys and girl, they give you a shout out, Steve. Love your show for putting up constant gaming hardware updates. My question, I bought a Korean monitor from Newegg, QNX Evolution 2 SE, bro. I added the bro in for flavor. The monitor is able to overclock at 96 and 120 Hertz. However, the response time for the monitor is 8 seconds. Is there a trade-off in gaming between having a higher Hertz than the standard 60 Hertz and having a higher response time? Thanks. Love your show and keep it geeky. Theory.
Well, first off, I'm pretty sure you mean 8 milliseconds, not 8 seconds. An 8-second response time would be
pretty bad
with the monitor.
Very,
You're gonna have a bad day.
Very slow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is actually a good question. I'm surprised this doesn't come up a little bit more often, but when you're dealing with monitors, and particularly how fast a monitor is and how that relates to your gaming experience, because a faster monitor generally, like Steve likes, really high refresh rate monitors. So if you can handle, okay, so you have refresh rate, which is basically like 60 Hertz is what most monitors have, and then nicer ones like yours, if you can overclock it, you can go up to the 90, 120 Hertz range. So that's basically saying the signal coming from your computer, wherever your source is, to the monitor is being sent that many times per second, 120 times per second or 60 times per second or that sort of thing. Whereas the response time is talking about the pixels in the monitor. It's saying when that pixel gets the message, hey, change from this color to this color, how long does it take to do that? It's usually measured as gray to gray, but that's the basic concept. Now you're dealing with 2 units of time here. You have the Hertz of the refresh rate. And that's usually, we'll keep it to 60 hertz for now, just for the sake of simplicity. So that's 60 times per second, or 1/60th of a second. Whereas when you're talking about the response time of your pixels, that's measured in milliseconds. That's thousandths of a second. So an 8 millisecond response time for a pixel
8 over 1,000.
is 8 over 1,000, which is about 1/125th of a second. So I was kind of talking with Steve about this a little bit earlier, and my basic principle that I go by here is that as long as your pixels can keep up with the refresh rate that's being pushed by your source, or by the refresh rate that the monitor is set to, then you generally should be okay. If you flip it the other way, then that's when you might run into issues. So an 8 millisecond response time, even though that's a bit high compared to like TN displays or that sort of thing, is still much faster, or at least like twice as fast as, say, a 60 hertz refresh rate. So that's kind of the way that I think about that. I hope that makes sense to you all.
Yeah, response time for me whenever I was shopping for a monitor in the past, because primarily I'm more concerned about gaming than color reproduction. So if I had a higher response time, or I should say like 1 millisecond being slower than 8 milliseconds, I was always concerned about ghosting across the screen whenever you're moving your mouse and you kind of see a trail behind it, a dark trail behind it. That's sort of an example of ghosting. Or if you see imagery that sort of fades with it, with something, an animated character that's moving across the screen, there's always something that I didn't want to have. So that's why I usually try and go with something that has the lowest possible response time with the highest possible refresh rate. That's usually my goal for any monitor I use for gaming.
Yeah, but I really think it would only be an issue, those two things propped up against each other. So if you had a really slow response time, so say like 12 milliseconds or something like that, and also a low refresh rate, like 30 hertz refresh rate or something, that's when I think you might run into issues that will seriously affect how things look and how things are happening on screen, particularly with more fast-paced games like FPS shooters.
Yep, sounds good. All right, cool. Moving on, we've got A&M Productions. He's asking, or she is asking, not sure there, if I upgrade my GPU, do I need to upgrade anything else with it? Now, it's kind of a vaguer question, but still a good one. It really depends on your CPU and your memory and your GPU, for that matter, and what you're upgrading that GPU to. So if you're kind of like 1 or 2 generations behind, and you're upgrading to like, you're thinking of like picking up an 860 or something, a GTX 860, you should be all right. But if you've got like an older Pentium processor in there and you want to upgrade to like an 880 or like a Titan or something like that, or even a 780 Ti, you're going to run into some bottlenecking issues for sure. So you kind of always want to scale your hardware evenly. If you upgrade one thing, you kind of keep in line with, make sure all your other components are up to date. That's not saying that they all have to be on the same generation and on the same level, and they have to have been released in the same production line or the same cycle, but you generally want to keep everything nice and balanced as far as hardware goes.
I'd say I would add to that too. Your power supply also needs to be able to support whatever GPU you pick, and your chassis. If you're talking about maybe an older Compaq or HP that's like pre-made at a certain size and a certain amount of clearance for that card, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to fit in a bigger card than what it can actually use, or with the power supply that would come with that system might not be able to power it. I think I think PC Perspective actually did a story where they took older systems and then dropped in a Maxwell-based GPU and just showed how well it was able to perform because most of the PSUs were able to power it since it was so power efficient. So.
Yeah, I also think the thing you're really going to want to pinpoint is your CPU actually holding your graphics card back? So if that's the case, and assuming you've bought the newer graphics card, what I would do, looking at it from a home user perspective, well, what I would do is I would take that graphics card and put it in another system that is faster and see like how it performs there, and then compare the two. Since you might not have that capability, I would say look at your graphics card, find a game or two that you know you have and you can test. Go online and find other people's benchmarks for that graphics card with a higher end system and see what the general frame rate they're able to achieve with their settings, copy their settings and everything. Then take your graphics card and your lower powered CPU system, run the same test yourself and see if you can get something similar. If your results are much lower or significantly lower, then that's probably a good indication that your CPU is holding you back.
That's actually really good advice, Paul. And something I used to hate doing was trying to find my specific system out there somewhere in someone else's benchmarks. Depending on your system and whatever you're currently running, depending on if anybody else has used that as a benchmark, it becomes more difficult. I used to actually build systems that were closer to benchmark systems that on sites I was following, because I already knew, oh, if I buy this $500 card, I can can expect this performance. It was a really easy way for me to kind of shoehorn in what I could expect.
Also,
with each purchase.
a good excuse to build more computers.
Yeah, well, always.
Sweet. All right, moving on. We've got Joseph A. saying, "What up, Newegg TV?
What up, Joseph A?
Will you guys be doing a video featuring the Kraken G10 and a compatible closed-loop cooler? I would love to know what you guys think of this unique product. Thanks, and keep those Q&A videos coming."
Nice.
Right back at you, Joseph.
So we do not have a video scheduled or coverage scheduled for that particular unit, the Kraken or Kraken G10, depending on how you like to pronounce that particular word. However, shameless plug, I did do some testing with that on my own personal YouTube channel, so you can check that out. It's youtube.com/paulshardware. And I did an installation of the Kraken G10 on a couple R9 290Xs. And then I also did a second video called Are We Ready for 4K, where I tested that configuration in Crossfire as well as a bunch of other high-end graphics cards to see how they perform specifically at 4K resolution. So shameless plug, check that out. And sorry, I don't think we have anything scheduled on Newegg TV, but hopefully that will give you something to watch.
Cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, we got Spud NV, capital NV. So Spud Nevada.
Word.
Spud, or maybe it's Spud NV, like Spud and vodka.
Oh.
Kind of like before and after. I don't know. Speculating too much. It's all speculation.
He envies it for Spuds.
Anyway, Mr. Spud writes, "I read an article about how a RAID 0 array using two 250 gig SSD drives will boost performance. So I purchased a new Samsung 840 EVO from Newegg, but now I'm not so sure how to add that to my existing setup. My current operating system and games are loaded on my C drive, which is an ATA Corsair Neutron 230 SSD. Thanks for all your help." Now, I can actually speak some wisdom to this question myself, and actually, as another shameless plug, I actually covered this exact topic on a recent Q&A segment I do on my own channel,
hey.
youtube.com/awesomesaucenews. Hey, yeah, holla at your boy. So basically, the way I would go about answering this guy is the speed of your RAID 0 array is limited by your slowest drive. So you can RAID two different SSDs, even if they're slightly different capacities, that's fine, but you are going to be limited by the slowest one. So generally when you RAID, more or less, you get about double the write and read performance, right? So if you have two of the identical drives that are 500 megabytes read-write, let's say, you double that, theoretical throughput is about a gig per second, or yeah, 1,000 megabytes per second. Now let's say you have a slower drive with that 500 megabytes per second drive, that's like only 400. When you double those two, you're actually only going to get about 800 megabytes per second. So keep that in mind. Whatever your slowest drive is, that's what your RAID performance is going to be doubled. So you can do it, but honestly, if you're going to do this in the future, I would go for an identical drive. There also have been some issues that say you should get identical drives, even though it'll still work without it. Sometimes you might run into issues with compatibility, especially if the different controllers on each of those drives handle trim operations differently, is what I've also read as well, so bear that in mind.
Yeah, and if you're going for RAID, bear in mind it is an unstable solution. It's very fast, but we like to use the analogy, it's like running with scissors. It's fast, but it's dangerous. So make sure that if you have a RAID array, particularly RAID 0, that you're backing the stuff that's on there up regularly if it's important. And then like Kyle said, I would recommend, rather than RAIDing your 840 EVO with your existing drive, maybe save up and get a second 840 EVO, and then you just install those both, make sure they're both plugged into the right controller. In your pre-operating system loading environment, as you boot up, usually you'll have something like with Intel's controller, I think it's Control-I, you press as you're booting, you go in the RAID configuration utility and get that all set up. If you're gonna RAID with your existing drive, copy everything from that drive that you need, back it up first, and then you're gonna need to format that drive, set up the RAID configuration in your pre-OS UEFI or BIOS loading environments, and then you're gonna need to reinstall Windows on top of that. So it might be a little bit more work than you might be willing to deal with. Honestly, for most home users, an 840 EVO is really fast. So RAID 0 is not necessarily necessary if you've already got a really fast SSD, unless you really need it for something like video editing, or you really want your games to load up in 7 seconds instead of 12 seconds, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and to add to that too, I've had my own experience making my own RAID arrays in RAID 0 and having them fail. So it's not really the drives themselves that fail, it's the array that fails. And when that happens, you lose it all. So I can't reiterate to you.
It's okay, Steve.
I can't reiterate to you how important it is.
Also, one last quick tip: if you are going to RAID, do it at your own risk. That's fine. Have fun, back it up, but don't install your OS on it.
No?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I guess if you don't want to completely to have a failed system, but if you want the fastest possible, then the OS is going to be the one you want.
Because I mean, if you're just using it as like a scratch disk for editing, or maybe for storage or something like that, games you can reinstall your games no problem.
Yeah.
But your operating system is kind of a pain in the butt to reinstall, especially you lose everything.
Unless you just have unlimited money and just want to make like RAID 5 array or something like that, then you have parity built in, and it gets way more complicated.
It's just like living life on the edge.
Yeah.
You're just a wild man.
And definitely don't raid with Leroy Jenkins.
Thank you for that, Steve.
You're welcome.
I can die happy. I can die happy now. All right, this last question is from Matthew C. Dear my dearest Newegg TV crew, can you please shave Kyle?
Of course we can.
Kyle's
What?
already shaved.
No, I never agreed to that.
Break out the clippers.
Ah, damn it. On that note, I think we
Good
should.
question. We need to clarify this before we move ahead. Are we talking about like shaving the head, shaving the beard,
Oh, the beard.
full body? Is
We
that
should
what
give
we're
him
looking for?
stripes.
No,
And do the crisscross.
A
with the
mohawk?
I want
eyebrows.
stripes of the tiger.
All right,
It's not a good look for me. Specify in the comments
All right,
what part of me do you want the team to shave. And I'm just
This is what happens when Jenny's not
trying
here.
to get some clarification, guys. You gotta work with me here.
Down the
I
drain.
think the show's gone downhill without
Yeah.
Jenny here.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we do miss Jenny. Like I said before, she's on vacation. If you guys want to leave her some love in the comments below, be sure to do that. Jenny, we love you!
We love Jenny.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we're done.
We are.
So thank you guys for watching. I'm Kyle
I'm Paul.
I'm Steve.
with Newegg TV. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.